Hey, hockey fans, T-Boz is 13-3 here with top shelf guest, Burnsville, Minnesota native, 1985 state hockey champion, Des Moines Buccaneer, St. Thomas Tommy, and current Twins and Wild analyst at Bally Sports North, Kevin Gorg. This episode is sponsored by Riverside Bike and Skate, Chippewa Valley Orthopedics and Sports Medicine, Dooley's Pub, Raleigh's Coach Club, and Williams Diamond Center. Moogie.
All right, we were lucky enough to beg Kevin Gorg. We were at a hockey game in Philadelphia, and we got to meet him when the Wild were playing the Flyers out there, and he graciously accepted our invitation to do an interview. So we're at our home away from home, Tom Reed's. Welcome, Kevin.
Great to be here with you guys. It was fun to meet you in Philadelphia that night. We don't get a lot of connections to the Midwest when you're on the East Coast, and I love it here at TR's. You know, St. Paul is kind of my home away from home. Obviously, my 18th year on the beat covering the Wild, and after a practice or before a game, this is the place we always tend to migrate, so this was a great choice.
Well, we appreciate that. And, you know, our fans are going to know you as the guy with the microphone talking to the Wild, but let's get to know the Kevin of the past. Grew up in Burnsville, Minnesota. What drew you to the game of hockey?
Well, it's funny. I was a little guy, 5 or 6 years old, and I came to the game of hockey like a lot of people, watched it on TV. There was a cartoon called Peter Puck back in the early 70s, and I was just drawn in by Peter Puck, which led me to wanting to play, started with street hockey, knee hockey, and eventually sign up as a 6 or 7 year old to be a hockey player. And I always wanted to be the guy in the net. I'd always have my dad shoot Nerf balls or tennis balls at me. And so I wanted to be the goalie. And as you guys know, with youth hockey, they're looking for goalies. They're starving for goalies. And so that was a natural. I hopped right in there. Day one was a goaltender. I skated a couple games out in mites, but I was the kind of the regular guy they'd throw between the pipes. And back then, most of your practices were outdoors. Half of your games were outdoors. And if you're going to be a hockey player and you're going to be a goalie, if you can survive outdoor hockey, any goalie will tell you that outdoor hockey is the absolute toughest of tough for goalies, because your gear is cold and wet, the pucks are frozen, you're standing still, you're not moving, so you're really ice cold. You can survive that, you can do anything in terms of playing that position. And from that point on, we got to go indoors as squirts and peewees and moving forward. So it was all gravy from there.
Nice. So always a goalie from day one. Interesting. So did you have some buddies that played when you were young kids too, and you all got into it together? Yeah,
I lived in the same neighborhood as the Osikis. And Tom Osiki was the varsity coach. Mark Osiki was a year younger than me in school, but we were the best of friends. And Mike Luckcraft, one of our star defensemen, was in that neighborhood. John McDermott, one of our forwards, and it was a whole crew of us. And for the younger people that are tuning in today, this is before video games, so we were outside like playing all the time. We rotated between basketball, baseball, football, golf, and hockey, and it was all in our neighborhood. We had like 8 or 10 of us that would rotate around, and whatever season you felt like that was the game, we were playing it. And so it was awesome. And then when we weren't in our neighborhood, we'd hustle down to the rink and play outdoors. And back then, the North Stars would use the Burnsville Ice Arena as their practice facility. So when we were down at our outdoor rink, guys like Gary Sargent were on the outdoor rink with us playing shinny. So it was a really fun time to be a young hockey player in Burnsville, Minnesota back in the 70s.
That's awesome.
That is fantastic. Well, and a great story. But, you mentioned you've been in the net, ever since you can remember mites. The question I got to ask is, every goalie's a little bit off center. You got your quirks. You got your...
I do. I did. I probably still do. I was the guy that would... And I've ended up where I'm supposed to be in broadcasting, because literally when I was in the net, I was broadcasting. Whether it was street hockey, shinny hockey, or practice with the guys, I was broadcasting while I was playing. I was talking to the posts. Sometimes I was singing. I was that guy. And so I think when people throw out that label that goalies are different, goalies are quirky, I fit that profile pretty well. I haven't met a lot of goalies that aren't a little bit off center. I look at Marc-Andre Fleury now with the Wild. I look at our Gus Bus, Philip Gustafson. They're both great guys, but they're both a little bit off center. And that's just who you have to be, because when you're the goalie, you get way too much credit when you're winning, and you get way too much blame when you're losing. So I think you have to be one of those types of people. You can handle some of that, and I think a lot of times you do it with humor.
So what kind of songs did you sing, Kevin?
Well, my go-to back then was "O Canada." I think as any hockey-loving kid would tell you that you had to fall in love with that. And I carried that tradition on. So when I was in youth hockey, I would sing it during practice. When we got to high school, the tradition was on the bus, on the way home from a road game, if you won, and only if you won, the bus driver would give you that little microphone contraption, and I would lead the team in "O Canada" on the way back to the high school after a road victory. And then I carried it forward to my time at St. Thomas in college because we practiced at the State Fairgrounds Coliseum. Wonderful rink. And if you remember when the Coliseum was set up, it was a huge cavernous building, right? Everything echoed. And I would always be one of the first ones out there for practice. And they always had the microphone on from whatever game was the night before, or the day before, the high school games. The microphone was on in the penalty box. I would go in the penalty box as the guys were filtering on the ice, and I would sing "O Canada." And I'm not a great singer, but in that building, like when you're in the shower, if it's echoing enough, you can cover it up enough where it actually sounded that listenable.
Okay.
Yeah, that was my song.
I love this story.
So we got a goalie and an accomplished singer.
Well, yeah, accomplished in my own mind, for
That's
sure.
Very wonderful.
You were definitely an extrovert.
Yes. Yeah, extrovert was certainly something you would call me. I enjoyed my personality was I enjoyed being a part of the mix, right? And when you're a goalie, you grew up with these guys, you played hockey with these guys. I was always one to try to keep things light at the rink, and there's ups and downs in every season. And I think everybody has their role on each team in that locker room. I was the guy that tried to bring some levity, have some fun. There were other guys that were, okay, we got to get serious now. We got to get to work. There's a combination thereof. And I think in every locker room, there's room for all kinds of those personalities. What makes it so special? I mean, now I'm 56 years old. I'm almost 40 years removed from my high school time at Burnsville, but I still remember, those pasta feeds, those bus rides, the time at the rink. I don't really remember a lot of the games. It's too far back in my memory now that they all kind of run together. But I do remember all the great times that we had. And I think for young hockey players, that's what you get. Like I look at some of these kids now and I understand that there's different kids at different levels and they want to get here and they want to get there. I wouldn't give up the time I had at Burnsville High School with my buddies for anything. I don't care if you would have guaranteed me an NHL I would never have given up those years at Burnsville with the guys I grew up with, wearing the black and gold, representing our community, having a chance to go to the state tournament. For me, that was the pinnacle of my hockey career. I had a lot of great memories, but that was it.
So you mentioned your outgoing personality, and one of the things I learned about you when I was doing your research was your year in Des Moines as a Buccaneer, that you were the most valuable player in the team and the most popular.
Well, you did your research. I didn't know that was out
there. I
get
it now. I get it.
Well, when I was in Des Moines, it was my first time away from home, right? And I'll never forget, get sent down there. They had drafted me, and training camp was at an Army barracks in Iowa. And it was tough. Like, our coach was Jim Wiley, who just passed away a year ago. He ended up coaching the San Jose Sharks. Great coach, great guy, but we had a terrible hockey team. 2 weeks into training camp, I called home and said, I'm not sure I can do this, Dad. I'll give my dad full credit. He's like, listen, wait it out. You're going to be fine. He kind of hung up on me and said, toughen up a little bit. I needed that. But once I kind of committed to it, it worked out great for me because I had played on a really good high school team where I didn't see a lot of pucks. And to play on a team like the Buccaneers that year, that we gave up 40 or 45 shots a night, sometimes 50, it helped me develop my skill. And then I just decided Des Moines was so much like Minnesota to me. It was a Midwest town. We had a great fan base. And so then I got involved with youth hockey, and then I got involved in the community. I worked for a company called Pioneer Seed. I was delivering seeds up to Ames, Iowa, to the seed lab there at Iowa State. And so I got kind of entrenched in the community and got involved. And it ended up being just a wonderful year for my development, not just as a goalie. I really, started to find my skill set and figure out how to play the game and actually see a bunch of shots every night, which really helped me develop. Where in high school, I was seeing 15, 20 shots a night. I was just kind of sitting there. Like, we had such a great team. It was different. And then once I bought into the place I was living, it was phenomenal. So that was such a big year for me. Nearly went back for a second year because Ohio State had kind of nibbled at the idea of me going back for one more year and, maybe sneaking out of their roster as a backup goalie on a partial scholarship. But after 1 year away from the academics, my family and I talked, and I'm like, God, I really got to figure out that part of the equation. And we visited St. Thomas. I fell in love with the campus, and I'm like, now this is where I belong, and it was the right choice.
Well, you had a set journey, and you were dialed in. But let's go back 1 second back to high school. You were in the state tournament.
Yeah.
Arguably the best high school state tournament in the nation. What's that like? You're strapping on your school colors and you're getting on the ice, representing your team as the goalie, your city, and you're in the big picture. I mean, you're on TV, the whole works. What's going through your mind?
It was a dream. I mean, people ask me that question a lot. It was a dream come true. I was the guy growing up that once I started playing hockey, and it became kind of an obsession. And so my dad was a golf pro, and so he worked really hard all summer, but the winters he was off. And so in the wintertime, he could kind of, indulge in hockey everywhere. Well, one thing that he loved was the state tournament. And so through him, I fell in love with the state tournament. So the deal was, if I was keeping up with my grades and I wasn't in trouble at school, that every year, the Thursday of that state tournament, back when it was a one-class tournament, I got a free pass out of school. My dad would take me down to the state tournament. We would go to the early session, and then all the golf pros would meet at a place called Gallivan's here in St. Paul. It's no longer there. Great little bar and restaurant, a lot like we are here at TR's. It was kind of a sports bar. We'd go to Gallivan's in between for dinner and then go back to the evening sessions. And that was from like age 7 all the way through my time at the high school. So the tournament was this wonderland, this dream, right? This far off place. But I knew that playing youth hockey through squirts and into peewees and then into bantams, that we had a really good team. And now you start to kind of put the jigsaw puzzle together, and you're thinking, well, wait a minute, if we keep doing this, we've got a chance to live out that dream. We've been watching these games as little kids every year. The state tournament is just this unbelievable holy grail for high school hockey. And then as things progressed, our year as bantams, we got to the state championship game. We got our doors blown off by Park Grove that night, but we got there, right? We got to the tournament, we got to the championship game, and then we were like, all right, this is doable. And so then as things progressed, our sophomore year, I was on the JV, but the varsity got there, and it was the first time Burnsville had been to the state tournament. They got to the championship game. They got beat by Hill Murray. We got back there, didn't win it as juniors, and then we won it that senior year. It was an incredible experience, and like I said, it just felt like a dream come true.
So I want to go back to your comment about your dad. You mentioned that he kind of made you stick around in Des Moines and kind of suck it up. And dads had so much influence over their kids. And sometimes dads make the right call, and unfortunately, sometimes they make the wrong call. But your dad made a great call. But you'd mentioned that he's a golf pro. So how's your game?
My game used to be halfway decent. I actually used to play a lot of golf. I think when I peaked, probably in the, early 90s when I was still an athlete, I could play to like a 9 or 10 handicap, so I could play decent golf. As you know, as the years go by, you get taken away from your game. I had 3 daughters, and my career was in broadcasting, so I'm working weekends. I'm not going on golf trips or going to the golf course. And slowly but surely, my golf game has deteriorated to a point now where I play maybe 5 times a summer at the most. It's usually in one of those corporate scramble things where you're there. And it's great fun, don't get me wrong, but I stink. And other than putting, the rest of my game is a mess, and I don't care for it. But thanks for asking.
Yeah.
Sounds like he can play with us.
He can definitely play with us Wednesdays. Let us know if you're available.
I love it.
I want to go back to your state high school championship game. Didn't you have the opportunity to meet a gentleman by the name of Herb Brooks?
Yeah, I did. And these are the memories you cherish, right? So back to my dad. He was the golf pro at the Faribault Golf and Country Club for 40-plus years, and Herbie Brooks ran his hockey school out of Shattuck at their campus. And so every summer, Herb Brooks would bring his coaches down, and they'd be down there for a bulk of the summer, and they like to golf. So Herbie one day came out to the country club, made a connection with my dad. They were both East Side St. Paul guys. So Herbie right away felt good about talking to my dad, Kenny, and they made a deal. And Herbie said, I understand you got a kid that plays hockey. Here's the deal. You can have him come, room and board, food, camp, as long as he wants, as long as the coaches come over and we can play golf. Kenny said, great. It's a deal. So for years, I would go down there for multiple weeks and get to go to Herbie's Minnesota hockey schools at Shattuck, and then he'd bring the coaches over, and they'd golf every summer at the country club, and Kenny would take care of them. It was a wonderful back and forth. So now page forward to the tournament. Herb Brooks, from the time that he had made that connection with my dad to 1985, when I'm a senior at Burnsville and the goalie, had won the gold medal, right? Maybe the most important hockey game in the history of the game, right? The biggest upset, at least from these parts. Yeah. So Herbie is doing the intermissions in the studio that's set up adjacent to the locker rooms down on the lower level of the St. Paul Civic Center. And so we get down there for our Thursday game. We are scheduled to be the last game on the slate against Bemidji. The game before us is Jefferson and Minnetonka, which was starting at 7 o'clock. Well, it goes into 5 overtimes. And so they end up finishing that game the next day because it had gone too far, and they had to start our game by 11 o'clock. But the point of it is we were dressed and ready to go during the third period of that hockey game. So now we've got 2.5, 3 hours where we're in our gear waiting for a game to end, and then we're going to finally get to play our game. So there are multiple intermissions that come and go. But when the game is going on, Herbie can see me kind of pacing outside the locker room. So he yells over, he goes, "Are you Kenny Gorg's kid?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And I walk over, and so he sits me down at like next to the desk where he's sitting, because they're also waiting to do a post-game show when that game ends. And he starts asking me about everything but hockey. And I know, I mean, it's Herb Brooks. I'm at first kind of freaking out, right? But then we just settle into a conversation. And so for almost 2 hours, I'm hanging out at the desk with Herb Brooks, getting to kind of pick his brain and getting to laugh a little bit, getting my mind off the fact that I'm very anxious about at some point going out on the ice and playing a hockey game. We ended up starting that game a little after 11 o'clock at night. They finished the Jefferson Minnetonka game the next morning. And Tom Osicki, I'll circle back to him, gave us the lecture after, because we got done at like 1 a.m., got back to our hotel at 2. And so he forbid us from watching that game. He wanted everybody to sleep in, right? Because the next game was going to start that next morning, like 8 o'clock, because they had to finish that game and then get the tournament cycle back on track. And back in 1985, all the games were on TV, even the consolation games. So the next morning, I'm not going to wake my roommate, because my roommate was John Burrell, one of our go-to guys on the front line, one of our first line forwards. So I put my sweats on, I tiptoe out of my room to let him sleep in. And I sneaked down to the lobby thinking, I'll be smarter than everybody else. I'll get to watch the game. I won't wake up my roommate, but I want to know who we're playing. And I'm sitting in the lobby. The game is on. I'm on the couch. I'm just kind of watching the game. And I get a tap on my shoulder. And it's Coach Osicki. I knew it. He's like, "I knew you couldn't resist."
Busted.
I was busted. And luckily the game ended shortly thereafter, and he sent me back up to the room. But he knew it. Like, I couldn't resist. And we wanted Jefferson to win that game because we lost one game that year. It was the final regular season game of the season. We had already wrapped up the Lake Conference title. And it was one of those games on the schedule where you knew that Jefferson was trying to prove something. We had buried them the first time we had played them. They were still a really good hockey team. Tom Satterdon was their coach. So we went over there and got beat. Tom Osicki, to this day, if you have a conversation with him, will point to that game as the most important game of the year, because we had gotten a little too big for our britches, and that loss kind of woke us up. And we had to beat a really good John Marshall team at the Met Center in the section final. And then we had to survive all kinds of drama at the state tournament. He points back to the loss to Jefferson that kind of woke us up and allowed us to get back to being the right team at the right time.
So what was Coach Osicki like to play for?
He was awesome. You knew he knew the game. You knew he had passion for it. And to be honest, we were a group of guys with a lot of personality. And I'll put myself near the top of that list. We needed a guy with a heavy fist. And we feared Coach O. Like, if you got out of line, you paid a price. If you weren't doing well in school, you paid a price. So you had to walk that line, and he was the perfect coach for our group of guys. He was hardest on his kid. Mark was a terrific defenseman for us, but Mark multiple times that senior year got the boot off the ice because he dared question his dad. He was a little more comfortable with Coach O than the rest of us. So if Coach O would give us an extra skating drill, he might protest, and then he might get the boot. Coach was tough on us. He was fair. And he was awesome to play for because he knew how to push the right buttons. And I'll never forget, the tradition that he established those last, state tournament runs that we had at Burnsville was once we got to the playoffs, we would listen to Eye of the Tiger before the game. He would come in and give his spiel, and then we'd all dim the lights, and then he'd play Eye of the Tiger. And by the time that song was done, we were like running onto the ice, ready to go. He knew how to I think, keep us in the right frame of mind, and he was just a fantastic, fantastic hockey coach.
Nice. Well, you have had, you're talking still your youth and high school years. You have had, legends that you've been able to talk to. And correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't current Buffalo Sabres head coach, Don Granato, have a connection to your team?
He was, he had a big connection.
I want to hear this story.
Well, so Donnie's family, they had the Stroh Brewery in Chicago, right? The dad was a bigwig with Stroh, and they were all hockey players from Downers Grove. Tony, at this point, had moved on to play at Wisconsin for the Badgers, and the kids wanted to play in the Minnesota State High School Hockey Tournament. They said, Mom and Dad, we go to all these summer hockey camps. They had been to the one in Minnesota I referenced that Herb ran, and we want to play in the state tournament. Well, how do you do that? Well, you better buy a house in Minnesota. So they bought a house in Burnsville. At the time, Tony was in college, but Donnie, Robbie, sister Cammie, who ended up being an Olympic star, USA. So anyway, they bought a house in Burnsville, not far from where I live, maybe a mile or two from where I lived. Moved in the summer before my senior year, which was also Donnie's senior year. And it worked out pretty well because that game I referenced at the Met Center, which was our section final against Rochester John Marshall, Sean Podine, who would end up winning a Stanley Cup or two with Colorado, scored 2 goals on me in the first 5 minutes. We were down 2-0 5 minutes into the game. It ends up being a 3-3 game in the final minute of the third period. Donnie Granato got the puck behind the net and noticed that the goaltender was cheating off the post and rifled a puck off his breezers and in the back of the net. Game-winning goal with like 30 seconds left to put us into the state tournament. So thank God they bought a house in Burnsville.
Yes, of all the towns in Minnesota to pick.
It worked out okay for everybody involved.
That's all right. Good one. So I was looking at the program from 1985, the state tournament, and there were some studs in that tournament. I mean, obviously you were there. You had Brad Stepan, for crying out loud, who just retired and now is shadowing Bill Guerin with the Wild, my understanding.
That's his dad that played in 85. His dad played for Hastings.
Okay.
That was Derek that played in the NHL. Brad was his dad.
That's right.
Still coaching, I believe, in Wisconsin.
I think he does something with the Chippewa Steel, some kind of.
Yeah, I think you're right. Great guy.
Does something with that. And then you had Mark Osicki, Steve Rollick from Hill Murray, Tom Sagasor. A lot of those guys went to Madison to play
for the Badgers.
A lot of big names in that tournament.
And, of course, Big George Palawa. Maybe the most imposing high school hockey player that I've ever seen. We played Bemidji in that first game. Yep. And so the night we played Bemidji, that was the game that got delayed by all those overtimes. He scored 2 goals on me in that game. We won 5-3. He was a monster. Now, the story was he was a first-round draft pick by Calgary. Yeah. North Dakota locked him up, and the summer before he was going to North Dakota, that horrible car accident where him and his brother were out drinking. They didn't want to drive, so they parked, but they parked like on a railroad track. Didn't know that, and they got hit by a train, and an awful story. So, but he was an unbelievable hockey player. You just don't see a lot of Minnesota high school players back in the mid-'80s go like top 10 in the draft, but he did.
He was a monster, though.
He was like 6'4", 240. Now, this day and age, that's big, but back in 1985, people weren't that big.
Yeah.
Like he stood out in a crowd, and he could skate, and he could shoot the puck. Like he had good mitts, soft mitts for a guy his size. He was one of those players where you saw him, you didn't only know he was a D1 player, because when you saw, you mentioned Rollick, Marco Siki, you knew they'd be great college players. But when you saw this kid, you're like, he's going to be a pro. He's going to be an NHL guy. And so we never got to see that play out. And we were just up in Bemidji for Hockey Day, Minnesota, a handful of years ago. And there was a banquet the night before where all the teams gather. And I'm kind of the MC, or one of us they picked me that year, but I was emceeing this particular banquet. Sometimes it's LaPanta. Bottom line is his parents were there. And I told the story of George and what an honor it was to share the ice with him and play against him, and what a good player he was Mom and Dad were at the bank when they came up after, and they were crying, and it meant a lot to them that we were even there. And so we talked about him a lot that weekend, covering those games. And it was a really sad story, and it was a hockey player whose career would have been brilliant, but it got cut short.
Yeah.
Well, it's nice that you remember his legacy.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to give a quick shout out to a couple sponsors. Chippewa Valley Orthopedics and Sports Medicine has been committed to the healthcare needs of patients in Western Wisconsin since 1954. The orthopedic surgeons and athletic trainers serve many area schools. Their success and reputation as an outstanding orthopedic clinic can be attributed to the teamwork of friendly, knowledgeable physicians and staff. And Riverside Bike and Skate, Eau Claire's hockey headquarters, which is the oldest hockey store in the state of Wisconsin. Buy hockey gear from the people that play and know the game. And don't forget about their bicycle sales and service, as well as your paddle sports center for kayaks and canoes. Stop down and see Pat Robecki. He'll take care of you. Mogi.
Absolutely. So I did reach out to one of your good buddies, Mark Osicki. He's been a previous guest on our show, and I've kept in contact with him a little bit throughout the last couple of years. And I thought, you guys played together. Maybe I'll just ask Mark if he has any poop on you. So
he embellishes on us. Well,
we're going to give you a chance to, set the record straight here, Kevin. So he said, ask him these. Did you or someone else drive a car through your parents' yard?
Okay. Okay, that's a fact. Yeah, I can't even deny that, because if my dad hears this, he'd know. So we were getting ready. It was Paul Lewis and I, a mutual friend, and he's currently a pilot for Delta, still a very close friend. We were getting ready to go out somewhere, right? And my parents were out doing something. And so our yard sat on the corner where we lived on Fremont. Osicki's lived on Leisure Lane, and then this corner of our lot kind of connected those two roads. So I don't know what possessed me. I don't know. I must have been 17 years old, 18 years old. I just took a shortcut. Unfortunately, and I was showing off. I was a kid doing something dumb, right? I wasn't spinning out and wrecking the grass, but I was driving on our lawn. As I'm on the lawn, my dad pulls up, and that didn't go well, because my dad, like Coach Osicki, had a pretty good sized hammer too. There was no going out from there. Paul was looking for a ride home, and I was grounded. But yeah, that's a fact. I can't even deny that one. Good stuff.
That's awesome. Little childhood shenanigans.
Yeah, exactly. We all make some bad choices, right?
Absolutely. You get out of high school. You mentioned you went to Des Moines. You got to figure out your education. You go to St. Thomas. You didn't do too bad there.
Hung in there.
3 MEAC championships.
Yeah, we had a good run. And it's funny, you brought up the coaching thing earlier. I've been very fortunate throughout my hockey tenure to be around some unbelievable coaches. Coach Osicki, we talked about already. Terry Skripek, for a bulk of my time at St. Thomas, was our coach, and legendary coach in these parts. Ironically, when we won the state championship in -- he was the coach at Hill Murray.
Yep.
So that's kind of a really cool tie-in, right? Phenomenal coach. And so when we got to St. Thomas, we had a great group of players. We had guys that had played, at the highest level, had played in the USHL. And, D3 hockey was in a good place back then. There were some terrific teams. Stevens Point was the team to beat. Yeah. They ended up being the team my senior year where we were in the NCAA tournament, and we ended up playing them to go to the Frozen Four. They beat us in a 2-game total goal series. We tied the first night. They beat us 3-0 the second night. Their best player was a guy named Ralph Barahona. He ended up playing for the Boston Bruins. So I'm going to tell you, D3 hockey still, it continues to grow, continues to get better. But in 1990, when I wrapped up at St. Thomas, there were some unbelievable players.
Yeah.
Well, you were one yourself. I had
a good run, but again, like at Burnsville, when you look at goaltenders' numbers, I learned this the hard way when I was in Des Moines. You really are at the mercy of the guys in front of you. And I had unbelievable numbers at Burnsville because I had such a great team in front of me. I had terrible numbers in Des Moines because I was seeing 45, 50 shots a night, and we were getting our butts kicked. Then we go back to St. Thomas. We had loaded teams. We won 3 of 4 conference titles. We had a roster that was dominant. So the numbers probably look good. I belonged at the D3 level. I was a good, not great goalie. I knew I was never going to be a pro. Like as you get older, when you play the game, you kind of know where you slot in. And just as much as you can identify a George Palawa or a Marco Siki or Steve Rowlick or pick the player, you know where you fit in. And I knew that if I went to Ohio State, I likely was going to be a career backup goalie, and I wanted to play. And I decided, you know what, St. Thomas, great campus, great education. I know I can play D3 hockey, and it was the right choice for me. And I think now there are even more options for kids. There are more colleges. St. Thomas is now D1. Augustana now has a team. Yeah. It's grown tremendously.
So you mentioned Terry Skripek. That was interesting. So after your playing career, you went on to 2 years as a graduate assistant with Terry. So did you guys ever talk about that fateful night at the Mets or at the Civic Center?
Oh, it came up. It definitely came. It came up before that. I can promise you that, because there were some guys on our roster that played on that team. Dave Barishka, Jeff Blummer. We had a lot of Hill Murray guys ended up going to St. Thomas. So there were some conversations, but those 2 years were so pivotal for me, because when I went to St. Thomas, I wanted to be a teacher at that time. I wanted to be a coach, and then I minored in sports broadcasting. That was always in the back of my mind. And I started out as a teacher and coach, and those 2 years working with Coach Skripek were unbelievable. I got to be the JV coach. I got to be the goalie coach with the varsity. I got to learn how to handle putting a lineup together, dealing with disappointment when some kids are, on the power play or maybe sitting out or extras, and how you handle that as a coach, putting together a budget, ordering the bus schedule, all that stuff that I had never done. And I got done after my 2 years at St. Thomas, and I really felt like I was ready. And so, yeah, those 2 years were super impactful for me.
You've had quite a coaching history. You were at Burnsville for a while. You were at St. Thomas Women's. You won 2 MEAC championships. You've had quite a coaching career. Is there any reason you didn't continue down that path as opposed to going back into broadcasting?
I loved the coaching, and while I was coaching, I got started in broadcasting. I met Anthony LaPanta back when I was the Burnsville coach in 1993, and kind of fostered a deal that whenever my season ended, I would join him for section games, state tournament games, and onward. And so I made that connection with Anthony some 30 years ago, and so it was always in the back of my mind. When I got the job at St. Thomas, they were just starting the women's program. I had been a boys varsity coach at Burnsville and Moundsview for 5 years. I loved the kids. I loved the game. I didn't love all the dealing with the parents. Like a lot of high school coaches, that wasn't fun for me.
Yeah.
It's the hardest part of the job. And I was young, and I probably wasn't very good at it, frankly. And so in 98, when they started that program, I took a jump at women's hockey. Didn't know what I was doing, but I knew I wanted to be there. It was my alma mater. Spent a decade doing it and loved it. And if I didn't have 3 daughters and if money wasn't an issue, I probably would still be doing it now because I loved it that much. But because of my connection with Anthony and because I had done work at Canterbury starting in 2000 as a broadcaster out there and kind of found my way and got a little more comfortable doing it, in 06 when it was Fox Sports North and LaPanta had kind of become a fixture there, they were looking for a hockey guy, contacted me. They knew I was coaching, but they're like, we'll work around your coaching schedule. There's a gap in our slot for, pre and post games with our analyst. And I hopped over and I started doing it and I loved it. And from that point on, I did it for a year as a part-time guy. And after that first year, they came back and said, we want you to come over full-time if you'd be willing to leave coaching. And again, at that point, I've still got to put 3 girls through college. I'm like, this is a pretty great opportunity. I can always come back to coaching. I can do it on the side, which I've done. And it was the right choice for me at the time. I'll probably circle back, and I guarantee I'll be coaching before it's all said and done again. But it's been a good run. Like I mentioned, this is my 18th year on the Wild beat, and I've been very fortunate.
So you've also spent some time with the Twins during the baseball season,
Mm-hmm.
and my understanding is you also did some some work with the St. Paul Saints.
Yeah,
and you got to meet one of your favorite actors of all time.
Did I ever?
How'd that go with old Bill Murray?
I was the guy that grew up idolizing Bill Murray. So people of a certain age, and I'm in my mid-50s, as I referenced earlier, grew up with Caddyshack, Stripes, into Groundhog Day, into Scrooge. I mean, Bill Murray was iconic, right? So once again, I'm going to blame LaPanta because I'm not a baseball guy, but they needed a guy at the ballpark to be the kind of the roaming reporter. I'm in the hot tub. I'm getting the massage from the nun. I'm getting a haircut. I'm that guy. I'm out there with the tailgaters. I'm the goofball reporter guy, right? So I'm running around the ballpark. I spend the summer at Saints baseball. I'm having the ball, having the time of my life. Bill Murray's the part owner, but he's never there. So it just so happened that it's 4th of July weekend. I've spent half the year doing this job, and it's gone well. Dana Kicker, our full-time analyst, is a former Boston Red Sox. They're having all the old Red Sox back to Fenway that weekend for this reunion. So now we're down a guy. So they're like, well, we got to put Gorg in the booth with Anthony, and he could just kind of help fill the void, and at least it'll be a 2-man booth. Cool. So I'm in the booth. I didn't know Bill Murray was in town, but once in a while he would come into and he'd sit down in the dugout and be in the clubhouse, drinking beers during the game. Bottom line is, I'm in the booth. Well, it just so happens that in the middle of this baseball game, in a inning where the visitors end up scoring 7 or 8 runs, our right fielder drops not 1 but 2 pop flies. Now, the right fielder's a great dude. I'd interviewed him before. He's a fun guy. I had nothing against the guy. But I, at some point, looked at Anthony and said, listen, if you're a professional baseball player, you're going to make a mistake here and there. That's going to happen. You can't drop 2 fly balls in 1 inning. And now, we're down 7-2 here. Bill Murray didn't like that. And Bill Murray knew I wasn't Dana Kicker. I never played for the Red Sox. Who the hell's this guy? So now he may or may not have had a couple of pops along the way, but that's fine.
Hockey pops.
Whatever. Yeah, he had whatever. So picture this, right? I have been in the back of my mind thinking, dreaming of maybe one day meeting Bill Murray because I knew I was working for the Saints and I knew he's a part owner that came in and out of town. We'll see. So we're in the booth. The next inning has started, and we can see him come out of the dugout, and I'm like a little kid, like, oh, my God. And he's walking up the stairs slowly, and the fans are greeting him in there, the whole spiel. And it's a tiny press box up there. Dave Wright, a longtime voice at the State Fairgrounds Coliseum and of the state tournament, he's the PA guy. He's the media director, and Bill comes into the press box, and we're still calling, like, the baseball game's going on, and there's a knock at the door. Now, Bill Murray's, he's at least a foot taller than me. And so we're laughing like this is a bit, like he's going to do something on the air. Like we're going to get to do something with Bill Murray. This is so cool. And he does the finger thing, like come here. So I take my headphones off and LePanta continues to call the game. And I open the door and I'm smiling and he goes, wipe that smile off your face. I'm like, uh-oh. But I still in the back of my mind think it's a bit. Anthony turns around kind of half smiling thinking Bill Murray's being Bill Murray, right?
Yeah.
Well, he starts to read me the riot act. We soon find out that it's not a bit. Like he's legitimately really upset. Bottom line is, I get the boot. I never get any quality time with my idol, and I'm out of job. So it was awful. It was awful. He was not happy.
No,
so
I guess not.
And again, you never know what's going to trigger somebody. I didn't do it maliciously. I just simply stated that this probably shouldn't happen, and it did, and then that happened.
Wow. But how many people can say they got fired by
That's
Bill
fair.
Murray?
There you go. There you go.
That's fair.
During a live broadcast, no less.
Also fair.
All right. Well, you make the transition to the booth. And you've been doing it, like you said. You've been doing it for decades, and you've been calling the Wild for 18 years. Is there a particular interview that stands out that you could share? Whether it was a character or somebody that just absolutely shut you down like Gorgie, no, stuff it, I'm not talking to you, anything like that.
Well, I made one real big blunder, and I got to tell you, I'm forever grateful to Sidney Crosby. So we're going back to when they won their first Stanley Cup. I believe it was 2009. So the next season, and I'm a huge Sidney Crosby fan, I had watched him back when he was playing at Shattuck. Huge fan of 87. And our crew that work in our truck knew that. So they set up an interview, first intermission that next year. We're playing the Penguins early in the season at the old Igloo. And so I somehow got lost in translation. I thought they had received their rings from the Cup championship the year before. Actually, it was happening like that following weekend. We're there on like a Thursday night, right? So we're doing this interview, and welcome us out of break. We're here with the great Sidney Crosby. And one of my questions throughout the process of the interview was, you won a Stanley Cup. You just got your rings. What's it like? Now, he could have been a real jackass and put me in a real bad spot and said, you know what, do your homework. The rings are coming this weekend. He talked about the thrill of winning the cup. He covered for me in the interview. We get done, and I feel like a complete idiot. He stood around, thanked me for the interview. Thanks for the time. By the way, we're getting our rings this weekend, off the air, obviously, and forever grateful. So that interview still stands out as a wonderful, wonderful moment in time. Maybe my most memorable recent memory is a year ago about now. The Wild once again had gotten off to a slow start. It's the middle of November. Alex Goligoski was celebrating game number 1,000 in the National Hockey League, and he had all his family and friends, a lot of them from Grand Rapids, in a suite at the game. And we had done something during the game with his mom and dad. Huge group, big deal. We know he's kind of at the end of his career, so this is a big moment. Had been in and out of the lineup, had been a healthy scratch more than he had played. They're playing Carolina. You guys know how the story finishes. He gets out there in overtime, scores the winning goal. Yeah. It's like a Disney movie, for crying out loud. So we do those interviews with the number one star on the ice where they pipe in not only on our broadcast, but throughout the entire building. And it's an emotional win. It's a huge win, but it's a big emotional time for Alex. And he's a real quiet, stoic guy. It's who Alex is. And I asked the first question, like, Alex, you couldn't have scripted this. This is an unbelievable moment. Your family's sitting up there watching this. You just scored the winning goal. And I give him the mic, and he's bawling. He can't talk. He's crying so hard. Oh. And I get chills just thinking about it. So then the second question comes, like, what can this win do for your hockey team? You just beat one of the Cup favorites. And I'll never forget, he grabbed the mic, and he looked around. He says, guys, we have not played good hockey yet this year. He said, but fans, you've been there for us every step of the way. Don't go away. We are about to get going here. We are going to get rolling. This game's going to matter here in a couple months. And I've never had a guy do that where he like kind of looked at the crowd and like basically said, we got this. We're coming. And it was just awesome to experience it. Well, right after that game, they won like 10 of their next 12. I mean, he looked awfully smart, right? But I go back to the emotion. Family up in the suite, him scoring that goal and having that happen. The only other time I'd ever had that kind of emotion was on the baseball side. And I've kind of transitioned now away from Twins. I'm back doing work for Canterbury, so I don't do as much Twins anymore. I'm kind of the fill-in guy. But I was there the night that Jim Thome had that unbelievable night in Detroit where he hit 2 home runs to get to 600. And his dad, who's passed away since, was there. And I got to interview Jim Thome and his dad on the field the night that he went into the record books. That was a pretty special night, too.
Wow. Oh, Mo.
All right, we're going to let you catch your breath here while I read a couple of ads for our sponsors. Dooley's Pub has been Eau Claire's home for hockey and all sports fans since 2005. Dooley's Pub is a proud booster of the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire and local high schools. Dooley's is located on historic Water Street, providing excellent food and service, and has all your favorite sports televised at all times. And Raleigh's Coach Club is in Altoona, Wisconsin, located across the street from the Altoona Ice Center on Spooner Avenue. And they've been a staple in the Altoona community for decades, providing support and sponsorship for youth and adult sports. Raleigh's has a favorite beverage ready for you and your favorite team on the screen. And lastly, Williams Diamond Center is a fun and friendly place to find your next sparkling signature piece. Whether you're looking for a custom designed engagement ring, an anniversary gift, or a self-purchase to celebrate yourself, Williams has price points for every story and every budget. Buyers and sellers of estate jewelry, coins, and more. JC.
Wow. You have really given us an insight to some of, well, for lack of better terms, extraordinary interviews. But you run across a lot of personalities. Is there a coach that stands out that you've interviewed that's just got that humorous personality that you were able to connect with?
No question. Bruce Boudreau. Yeah. Yeah. Not only do I look like him, I have a lot in common with Bruce. I don't want to look like him. It's just a fact. So he was a movie guy. So we would connect on that level, talking about movies we had seen. When we would travel, well, occasionally we'd sneak to the theater. Tom Reed, we're sitting in his pub. He would join us at some of those movies. And just the humor that he had every day, the way he would kind of take us behind the curtain, tell us funny stories. He always went back to his time, on the set of the movie Slapshot where they used his apartment. Bruce is a personality. He's a character, but he also had a big old heart. And he and I had a great connection. And, I look at the coaches we've had since I started at covering the team 18 years ago, from Jacques Lemaire through where we are right now with Dean Evison, who I love and respect so much. Great personalities, great people. Bruce was just a character, though. Like, he was unlike any of the other guys. Like, when you look at, because Todd Richards and John Torchetti and Mike Yo and the guy we got now, Dean Evison and Jock, they had that stare, that intensity. Bruce had a temper for sure. There was a breaking point, but he was just this lovable, funny, quirky guy. So without a doubt, he'd be the one that stands out.
Bruce, I miss having him in the league. Actually,
he's fun to have. Well, at least we get to watch him on NHL Network. His personality shines in that format, and he's the guy that's going to tell you exactly how he's feeling. He never had a filter, and that sometimes would get him in a little bit of trouble, but he was sure fun to cover.
We're talking about the Wild here a little bit when you're talking about these coaches. Is there, you get a little bit of the inside scoop. Is there a prankster in the locker room? The guy that likes to be the jokester a little bit?
I think there's a couple guys that come to mind, and Philip Gustafson's a guy you got to watch out for. Again, back to the goalie theme where they have a little quirkiness to him. He's sneaky, but Fleury's the one you really got to watch out for.
Bad.
So they kind of go back and forth, but Fleury's a guy that puts the time in. Like, he will set things up and do things to really irritate people. And I know with Gus, he likes to pick on Gus because, him and Gus have that fun relationship where he knows that he's mentoring this guy, but he also wants to keep him grounded a little bit and say, listen, now, you still got to put your time in. You're still the young guy. So Flower would be the guy you got to watch out for. And it can be just simple stuff. We've got the, where he'll have the shoes tied together when you're not looking. If you're doing an interview at your station, he'll actually get down on the ground, tie their shoes together. It came back the other way, though. If you remember our broadcast in Montreal early in the season, Flower, maybe his last game in his home province of Quebec, gets that big win, played brilliantly, and then Foligno comes out with the shaving cream pie while he's doing the interview on national TV in Canada. So if you're the prankster, it goes both ways. Flower is certainly the guy you got to watch out for, though.
All right. How about the intense guy? Is there anybody in the locker room that's just all business?
Ryan Hartman. Yeah, he's the guy that he's so intense sometimes he can't help himself. And he was the guy we chose to do the interview after the tough loss in Detroit the other night. And we actually had to beep out one of the words he said in our post-game interview because he used the F word, which he normally would never do. But that intensity kind of carried over. They're frustrated right now. They're struggling. He's taking it to heart. He had some chances in that game. Ryan Hartman is so intense. And when you get him away from practice or a game, he's awesome to talk with. He's got a great personality. He's a really good dude. But if you catch him on game night, he is locked in. Like, he's that guy. So you got to kind of give him his space, so to speak.
All right. And duly noted for you.
Yeah. And I learned it the hard way in Detroit. That's for sure.
All right. So you've been around the Wild, like JC had mentioned. You mentioned a couple times, 18 years. Have they ever asked you to strap them on and use you as an extra goalie, or you the e-bug for the Wild at all?
No. Thank goodness they haven't done that. Those playing days are long over. It's funny you mentioned that because Mike Greenlay, who used to broadcast with us, actually threw on the pads a couple times when they got into a really tight spot. They don't want to do that, but they were short, on one of those optional practice days where they have one goalie. Now the guy that's always at the rink and was there a couple days ago, the day we were flying out to Detroit, is Connor Beaupre. Longtime Minnesota North Star goalie Don Beaupre is his father. Connor, like his dad, is diminutive. He's a 5 foot, maybe 6 guy. And he was out there. Michael Russo was giving him a hard time after practice because the Wild were working on the power play that day. And Russo's quipped to him and said, well, it's gotten so bad for the Wild power play, they had to put you in the net to give him some confidence. Connor didn't like that very much. So Russo took a shot both at him and at the Wild power play. And that was kind of fun. So, yeah, that's their extra goalie.
Okay.
You got any thoughts on the Parise and Suter buyout and the still what I consider the long-term effects of that?
Yeah, it's still something that's kind of hanging over this organization. And I think that if you're a fan of the Minnesota Wild, you have to take a look at the man that made that decision and say, all right, Bill Guerin, here's a guy that's won multiple cups as a player. He's won multiple cups on the side of management. And there is a look and a feel that he knows works to get that job done. And for whatever the reason, Billy got there and had a year with those guys and kind of saw how the thing was playing out and said, this isn't what I want. This isn't going to work for me. I respect that. And I'm still in connection with both those guys. I would consider them friends. Zach and I text on a regular basis, but it wasn't a good fit here and now. And I think when you look at this from outside looking in, they were given these lengthy 12-year contracts, $100 million. There's a lot that goes into that. And I think for Bill Guerin to go up to Craig Leopold's office, knowing that he's not only friends with Ryan Suter and certainly has a lot of affection for Zach Parise, but he's business partners with Ryan Suter with that junior hockey venture, that's not a decision he probably made or took lightly. And so you have to trust it. And he wants a different environment. He wanted a change. There's a price that needed to be paid. And I think right now, Dean Evison and his staff are trying to overcome that price. I mean, you think about what $15 million does for any hockey team off the cap. That's 2 frontline guys like Matt Boldy, or it's 3 or 4 really good players like Ryan Hartman or Marcus Foligno. That's a lot to take out of the roster before you even start your team. The flip side of that's going to be where they are after next season. So you get through this year, you get through next season. Now you're going to have the freedom to really make some pretty creative moves. And you've got some young talent that's kind of waiting in the wings to join forces with whoever Bill Guerin goes out to bring in. But I think knowing Ryan and Zach and how strong their personalities were and how much they wanted to kind of run the show, if they weren't going to be a part of the leadership group, it wasn't going to work. And if Bill Guerin wanted a different person wearing the C like Jared Spurgeon, it wouldn't have worked. Like, those guys are super dynamic personalities. They have a ton of confidence. They're big time players. And I don't think you can, once the toothpaste is out of the tube, pull it back and say, okay, now you follow that guy's lead. So that's probably the perspective that Bill had. And because he's been there and done that, I think as folks that are all on the same page here, we all want to see the team do well. We all want the team to win. I believe that as long as Bill Guerin's here, that's going to happen. It's just getting from point A to point B was never going to be easy. And I think personally, the last couple of years during the regular season, they overperformed. And I do follow the lines in Vegas regularly. Their over under the last couple of years was in the low to mid 90s for point value. Both years they exceeded 100. I don't know how they did it. A couple of years ago, they did it with those 1-goal wins and those comebacks. Last year, I think Philip Gustafson was just on fire, right? Like he was for half a year, the second half of the year, just unbelievable.
Yes.
Was some of that stuff sustainable? I don't know. I still think they're a playoff team. And, the numbers tell you that if they continue to play the way they've been playing these last couple of losses, they can get back on track and get this thing going. But they put themselves in such a tough spot right now. There just isn't a lot of room, not only for error, but for any more injuries.
So we're talking with Kevin here. It's getting towards the end of November, and the Wild have had a pretty slow start.
Yeah.
And they really don't have a lot of opportunity to make a lot of changes. You can't really get rid of a lot of players. A lot of them have no move contract clauses in their contract. What good is it going to do to change the coach? Is Billy's job on the line because of that decision? And, I think the people they're a little frustrated, but
for sure,
like you said, it's been 100 plus point seasons the last 2 years, and pretty much the same group is back this year. And it's a slow start. Can they rebound? That's the big question.
Well, you have to ask yourself, as you look at this team right now, is Matt Boldy going to score 6-7 goals for the season? I don't think so. Like, this is a guy that I think every year is going to be a 25 to 30 goal guy, if not more. He's sitting on 1 right now. Now, he did miss some time, 7 or 8 games with that upper body injury. I think that will flip here at some point. Matt Boldy's going to score goals. He's an unbelievable player. He's getting chances right now. Whether he's missing the net or hitting the goalie, it's just not going in. Once he gets 1, that'll turn into 3 or 4, into 5, into a stretch of hockey where he's contributing, which will really help. Kirill Kaprizov didn't look like himself for most of the start of the season. Starting with the Colorado game on Black Friday, into the game in Detroit, he looks completely different. I don't know if it was a nagging injury. Nobody has told us anything, but he just looks different on the ice. That's a good sign. And they're finally fully healthy. So now you've got Jared Spurgeon. He's been back for 5 or 6 games. He's got his legs underneath him. You've got the blue line the way you want it with those top four. Brodin and Faber are awesome together. Middleton's game, I think now that Spurgeon's healthy, is going to start to trend in the right direction. To me, it's going to come down to two things. Your best players have to start scoring goals. And I mean, Boldy and Kaprizov have got to get back on track consistently, and they've got to figure out the penalty kill. That penalty kill has been a problem for this hockey team going back to last year, specifically in that playoff series, and it's killing them right now. And until they fix the penalty kill, and then part of that's the goaltending. You look at, Gustafsson's goals against is over 4, both their save percentages below 90. I don't care what hockey team you are, that's not going to work long term. And as a former goalie, I can tell you the stats aren't just the guy. Like, it isn't just Gus, it isn't just Flower. They're seeing a certain type of shot. You look at the power play goals Detroit scored, those 2 goals by David Perron, point to a goalie in the league that's going to make the save there. There's no chance for Gustafsson on either one of those. So those numbers are not just on those 2 gentlemen, but they're on the entire team to kill penalties better, to block more shots, to defend better. And yes, those 2 guys have to start making some big saves at big moments. I'll point to the Colorado game where Gustafsson played just fine. The Wild played a great game against one of the Cup favorites. If he makes one big save at one key moment, we're talking about a different result. It's a 1-goal hockey game. He hasn't made that save a lot this year outside of opening night when he was unbelievable. That hasn't happened this year. It happened last year. That needs to change. So goaltending and the penalty kill, those 2 things straighten out. A couple of go-to players like Boldy and Kaprizov start finding their offensive mojo. This can still be a playoff team. The hard thing right now for Bill Guerin is, you mentioned it, there isn't a lot of wiggle room for what they can do. Not a lot of moves they can make. They have to hope that the guys that they've got right now figure it out.
The thing that's so striking for me is that so many guys seem to be in a funk at the same time. I mean, through the season, obviously everybody has ups and downs,
Yes.
But it seems like there's a whole slew of guys on a down right now, and it's just, that's killing them.
The only player offensively that's either meeting or exceeding expectations is Joel Eriksson Ek. He's the only one.
Marco Rossi?
Rossi, I great, but we didn't have a benchmark. Like,
Sure.
he's been
Yeah.
great,
True. Yeah.
but he wasn't even here last year. So you're right. Rossi's a great call. He's probably been good, not great, but good enough. Ek's been unbelievable. Kirill, his numbers are starting to climb. Like I said, he looks the part. Boldy, Freddie Gaudreau had 19 goals last year, sitting on 0. So, I mean, and they're all working. Like, the hard part for me is, I'm there every day at practice. I'm there every day for game day. I see how hard these guys work. Last night, leaving Detroit was, outside of ending a season, like with a road playoff loss, that's as somber a group of individuals I've been around. For the fans that are out there that are frustrated, I am telling you, these guys care more than you could ever know. From the coaches to the GM to the players, they are beyond upset with the way things are going right now. I also realize that this is the exact same group that was mediocre up till the end of November last year and figured out a way to get it going. So I have the faith that they're going to do it. My fear is that we're going to get too far down the road. We're almost to December right now, and they are really at a point right now where they have to start winning. And so I look at this week where they play St. Louis, Nashville, and Chicago. All teams that are capable of beating the Wild for sure, but all teams at the Wild, if they want to be a playoff team, have to figure out a way to beat. Mm-hmm. Because after this week, it's been a horrible schedule for travel. And the week before they went to Sweden, they spent a week out on the East Coast playing the Rangers, the Islanders, the Sabres, and it was a horribly long road trip right before they went to Sweden. Well, they have another one of those trips. After the Chicago game, they go to Calgary, Vancouver, Edmonton, Seattle, 4 games in 6 nights, 4 different cities. So this is the week they have to get right. So it's kind of come to that.
Do you foresee one of the team leaders, whether it's Fleury, Spurgeon, whomever, sitting down with the team at some point, either last night on the plane or this week, and just have that come to Jesus moment where the guys, got to bond together and check each other's gear and, figure it out?
They've done it. I mean, they've had a couple of those meetings. Ryan Hartman said it best last night after the game. He said, we've talked and talked and talked and talked. He said, at some point here, we got to figure out how to walk the walk and get out there and produce. So I think they've kind of come to the point now where, when you're a hockey player, I don't care what level you play at, when you're in that locker room, Wayne Gretzky said it best. You're trying to earn the respect of your teammates. And the only way to do that, I think you have to figure out a way to be at your best when the team is not. And so each one of these individuals right now is going to be asked to go out there and do a little something extra. And it doesn't need to be anything flashy. It's a key block shot. It's drawing a penalty. It's a shorter shift that allows fresh legs to come on the ice. The little details in the game have kind of got lost along the way. And right now, that's the only way to dig yourself out. And I think they've all kind of come to that point where they're so sick and tired of talking about it and thinking about it. They just need something to go well. And I will tell you, as we record this today, Dean Evison did something I was super impressed with. We got on that plane last night leaving Detroit, and I mentioned how somber it was. And the idea of those guys coming to the Tria facility for practice today and then facing the media and regurgitating all the nonsense about we got to do this, we got to do that. He gave them the day off. He got them away from each other, away from the rink, and away from the media. And I think that will do and serve them well. And come back on game day, get ready for St. Louis. At this point, you're just looking for something. One win, be a catapult. They've got the right guys there. They've got a great group of leaders. They just need to figure out a way to win a hockey game.
Yeah. You had the privilege, honor, whatever you want to call it, to go overseas.
Yeah.
And be with the team over in Sweden. Although it wasn't a great trip, they did come back with a couple of points. What was that atmosphere like over there in Sweden? Were they welcoming to the NHL teams?
They loved it. Yeah. My first time going overseas. I'd never been outside of North America, and I didn't know what to expect. And the folks in Sweden just love the game. And I think they're so proud of their own, which they should be. Sweden produces a lot of high level hockey players. And so the whole weekend, it was a celebration of not just the guys on the rosters from Sweden, but it was also the history. The other players that have been there, have been to the National Hockey League from Sweden, have been such great players, Nicholas Lidstrom, some of those types of guys. So it was really cool to experience. And then the building itself that they played in, Avicii Arena, was built back in the late 80s. It kind of had a St. Paul Civic Center feel to it, where it had that old school where the crowd's right on top of you. The noise reverberates. It only held 13,000 and change, but it felt like a lot more because of that. And it was just a really fun time. And then just to see the guys on our roster, the Brodins, the X, the Gustafsons, the Johanssons, all the way down the line, so proud of where they came from. And, I had the chance to do a day where I walked around the city with Jonas Brodin, and he was able to show us different landmarks and talk about his career path and how much that impacted who he is now. It was spectacular. It was an awesome week. And, for me, it was my first time having a chance to go to a place like Sweden. So it was quite the privilege for sure.
So speaking of your trip to Sweden, you've been all across North America with the Wild.
Oh, yeah.
What's your favorite city to go to?
Favorite city overall would be New York. I like our head coach, Dean Evison, I love going to see Broadway shows. He sees more than anybody I know. I'm probably next in line. Love New York, love the energy of the city, love Central Park. There's a vibe there that is unmatched in any other city. I couldn't live there. I promise you I couldn't live there, but I love to visit New York. If it's Canada, it's Vancouver. Vancouver is spectacular. We're going to be there in a couple of weeks. You're on the water. It's a little warmer. It's a beautiful, beautiful city, wonderful restaurants, really cool place to visit. But New York for me, and it's not just the city, it's Madison Square Garden. That's my favorite place to watch a hockey game outside of St. Paul. Madison Square Garden, I don't care if it's a Monday night, Thursday night, Tuesday night, it feels like the biggest game on the docket. It just feels different at MSG. So I love it.
Nice.
I've got one last question for you, and that's you. To piggyback what Mogi just said, you're traveling all over North America for these games. Who has the toughest fan base?
Man, that's a great question. Growing up, a North Star fan, it was always Chicago. They were unbelievably tough. I made the mistake of wearing a Gilles Melas jersey to a North Star Blackhawk game. It got beer dumped on me from the level above. So back in the day, Chicago Stadium, when they're good, San Jose's fans were an unbelievable home ice advantage. I want to tell you a quick story. going back to my early years on the road with the Wild, Jacques Lemaire was our head coach, and the Sharks were really good. So when you play in San Jose, they have a no-fly rule at that airport after 11 p.m. So we would always play the game and then fly the next day. Most times in road games, we're flying out that night and just going to the next city. But San Jose, you're always staying overnight. So one night in San Jose, the Wild went out there. They got beat 4-3. It was a great hockey game. And I'm getting ready to leave the rink, finishing my duties. I'm going to walk back to the hotel. And I walk out at the same time as Jacques Lemaire. And so I was lucky enough to spend that time walking back. It's about a 20-minute walk back to the hotel. It's obviously nice weather in California. And he was upset about the game. And so we're walking and talking. And he looked at me and he said, Kevin, do you know? He goes, do you know what an advantage that rink is? And I said, not really. He goes, their fans are different than our fans. And he was frustrated. He said, our fans are great. They're at every game. Our fans are there to cheer for us. They don't get on the officials. And he said, do you watch that game? You see those officials? He goes, and he had the score sheet from the game in his pocket. He pulled it out. He goes, look at this, Kevin. And it was like 7 power plays for San Jose and 2 for the Wild. He goes, this is the difference. Their fans are all over the officials from the drop of the puck, and they get every call. And he was so mad. And he wasn't wrong. Like, Jacques had this analytic way of looking at things, and that was a raucous building. Bad example right now because they're kind of the doormat in the league. But back in the day when they were a good hockey team, their fans were so loud and so hard on the officials that it probably was a home ice advantage. Now, where we are right now, Sharks not being the same team, they probably don't have that advantage, but it reminded me of the Jacques story. If I had to pick a place right now, probably Philadelphia. Those fans are insane. Like, I know the stories of the Viking fans and the Eagle fans and the beer can, but Philly fans are different. They are nasty, and they get on you from the drop of the puck. And I have a lot of respect for them, but I would say they're the toughest.
Kevin,
fair enough.
This has been really fun talking with you. You're so passionate and you're so animated. You get so excited and you're telling these great stories. And you've been involved in many different sporting endeavors over the years. Obviously, you've told a lot of those stories. Are you really working if you're doing things that you love?
I feel like, the late, great Dark Star, who used to be one of our cohorts at Canterbury, said he had never worked a day in his life. And I always looked at him like, dude, you're on the radio every night from like 9 to midnight. That's a grind. But truthfully, when you think about it, had you told me let's go back to those days when I was dreaming about playing the state tournament. I had sports broadcasting on the back of my mind from day one. I used to do it in the driveway. If you would have told me that I would be with an NHL hockey team watching games from either the tunnel behind the home bench or on the glass on the road in the Zamboni tunnel, and I would have been getting paid to do it and traveling with that hockey team, I would have thought you were insane. I mean, it really could not imagine I'd be where I am, could not imagine it'd be 18 years. When I signed up to do this, I was coaching. It was going to be a part-time gig, and it was probably just going to be something on the side. It turned into something completely different, and I'm forever grateful because I'm the same guy now that I was back in the 70s and 80s. I was obsessed with the Minnesota North Stars. That was my team. The Wild are my team. Like, I have a lot of teams. People know I'm a Denver Bronco fan. I love the Twins. Support all the local teams like the Wolves. But if there's one team that I'm most passionate about, that I most want to see a championship, it's the Cup. It's the Minnesota Wild. And to be there with them, it is kind of like that state tournament. It's kind of a dream come true.
Nice. I apologize. You've just triggered another question I got to ask you. I know. Mogi always shakes his head at me because I always got one more.
It's all right.
You have a passion for your job. And when you're in between periods or at the end of the game and you're talking to these guys, how do you develop your questions? I
get that question a lot from like my family members.
Okay.
So I have the broadcast in my earpiece the whole night. So even if I'm roaming the building, I've got LaPanta and Carter or Walls in my ear. So I can kind of feel the energy. And I try to listen specifically to the guy that's with Anthony, whether it's Carter, Lou Nanny, Wes Walls. They'll bring up subtle points during the game about things that are going well or things that need to be corrected. And then I'll try to, in the back of my mind, make a little footnote and say, okay, Ryan Carter just talked about how Detroit defends and how the Wild have an opportunity to get the forecheck going by taking the puck down low, the blue line's open, going low to high, getting the point men involved in the offense. And then I'll try to bring that to my questions in the intermission or in the post game to kind of bring out what I heard from the analysts. And the rest of it is just kind of feel like right now, I feel the frustration that this team is collectively going through. And so after yesterday's game, I asked both Dean Evison and Ryan Hartman, when you get 38 shots on goal and only one puck is going in, what needs to change? Do you need to attack a different way? Because you're supposed to score more than one goal on 38 shots at any level, at any point, and we're not right now. And so part of it is my natural, whether it's the time I've spent in the game, coaching, playing, whatever, and part of it is trying to incorporate what our broadcast has kind of talked about and bring that back to the player, because fans want to hear the player. They love to hear from Carter, LaPanta, myself, but they really want to hear from the player or from the coach how we rectify that or what worked and how this, take us behind the curtain, how, does this whole thing mesh together? And so I try to incorporate my questions into fit kind of the tone of the broadcast or the tone of that game, and right now the tone of the season, which is really a lot of frustration for everybody involved.
Do you choose who you want to interview, or do the Wild pick that person for you?
We choose. We usually have a couple choices. We bring it to the PR group, and usually there's a pick and there's a backup. And the only reason there's a backup, these guys will never, ever say no just to say no. But sometimes, like at an intermission or a post-game interview, guys are getting treatment. And you know how secretive the NHL is about what's getting done. So if a guy tweaks something, they're going to just say, okay, he's getting treatment, go to pick B. So you pick A, pick B. I'd say we get our top pick 98% of the time. But if Joel Eriksson Ek loses a tooth and he's in the back getting repaired by the dentist, we're not going to get him. And they say politely, no, can you pick another guy? And we go to our second choice.
Okay. Wow. This has been a blast.
It's been fun, boys.
Yeah,
it goes by quick.
This has been a good time. It does. Thank you for being so gracious with your time with us. We appreciate it.
Kevin, it's been an absolute pleasure.
I enjoyed it so much. We have to do it again. And, I think the fun thing is for all of us that are hockey fans is, you go through dark times like we're going through right now. But the reason it's so much fun to be a fan, to be a part of it is, that sooner or later you're going to be on the other side. And so maybe the next time we do this, it's 7 or 8 wins we're talking about, not the 7 losses they're going through right now.
Yep, let's hope so.
Let's hope so.
We need it
for everybody's sake.
Ladies and gentlemen, please follow us on our social media platforms. When you give a comment, a thumbs up, whatever, it helps us stay in the game, and we truly appreciate it. Mogi?
Hey, a big thanks again to our special guest, Kevin Gorg, as well as you folks, our faithful listeners. Please remember to visit our sponsors, Riverside Bike and Skate, Chippewa Valley Orthopedics and Sports Medicine, Dooley's Pub, Raleigh's Coach Club, and Williams Diamond Center. And again, like JC said, follow us on your favorite social media platforms and check out our YouTube page. And remember, folks, until next time, keep your head on a swivel and stay on your inside edges.